The first gunshot pierced the morning air as Rachel Carson stood frozen on her porch, a letter clutched in her trembling hands. Colorado Territory, 1876, was unforgiving to women without protection, and at 19, she had just learned her fate was sealed. Her father's gambling debts had been paid with a promise her hand in marriage to Jeremiah Winters, a 52-year-old widower who owned half the cattle in Sloan County. "Pa, you cannot mean this," Rachel whispered, her voice breaking as her father avoided her gaze. Thomas Carson kept his eyes fixed on the dusty ground. "The deal's done, Rachel. We'd lose everything otherwise. Mr. Winters is a respectable man. He'll give you a good life." Rachel's mother had passed 2 winters ago from consumption, leaving her to tend to her father and 3 younger siblings. The drought had killed their crops, and her father's weakness for cards had done the rest. Now she was to be traded like one of their failing head of cattle. When? Was all she could manage to ask. 2 weeks, just enough time to prepare a proper wedding. Her father finally met her eyes, a mixture of shame and desperation evident in his weathered face. "I'm sorry, child." The next morning, Rachel rode into town, desperate to find supplies to mend her only decent dress for the upcoming wedding. Sloan was a small settlement nestled in a valley between 2 mountain ranges, with one main street lined with wooden structures, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a small church at the far end. The town bustled with more activity than usual. A cattle drive had arrived the previous day, bringing cowboys flush with wages and eager to spend them. Rachel tethered her mare outside the general store, pulling her shawl tighter despite the late spring warmth. She had nearly reached the door when a commotion from the saloon caught everyone's attention. A man came stumbling backward through the swinging doors, landing hard in the dirt. He was followed by a tall figure who moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew how to handle himself. "You'll not cheat honest men at my table again, Miller," the tall man said, his voice carrying across the street. "Take your marked cards and get out of Sloan." The fallen man scrambled to his feet, hand hovering near his pistol before thinking better of it. He spat in the dust and skulked away toward the livery. Rachel found herself staring at the tall cowboy. He had dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When those eyes suddenly met hers, she quickly looked away and hurried into the store. Mrs. Abernathy, the shopkeeper's wife, greeted her warmly. "Rachel, dear, I heard the news about your engagement to Mr. Winters. Such a fortunate match for a young lady in your position." Rachel mustered a polite smile. "Yes, madam. I'm looking for some thread and perhaps a bit of lace, if you have any that isn't too dear." Of course. Mrs. Abernathy bustled about, gathering items. "Mr. Winters has been so lonely since his poor wife passed. 5 years is a long time for a man to be on his own. He'll need a young wife to care for him in his autumn years." Rachel nodded silently, examining a spool of thread to avoid further conversation. The bell above the door jingled, and she turned to see the tall cowboy from the saloon enter. Up close, she noticed the fine lines around his eyes, signs of years spent squinting against the sun. He wasn't young, perhaps 30, but he carried himself with a vitality that made Jeremiah Winters seem ancient by comparison. "Morning, Mrs. Abernathy," he said, tipping his hat. "Got any of those peppermint sticks left? Promised the Wilkinson kids I'd bring some by." Quentin Lawson, buying candy for children. Mrs. Abernathy laughed. "Those little ones have you wrapped around their fingers, don't they?" The cowboy Quentin smiled, and something in Rachel's chest tightened. "Their pa's laid up with that broken leg, least I can do." Mrs. Abernathy introduced them. "Miss Rachel Carson, this is Mr. Quentin Lawson. He's trail boss for the Double R outfit that came through yesterday. Mr. Lawson, Miss Carson is soon to be Mrs. Winters." Something flickered in Quentin's eyes as he tipped his hat to Rachel. "Miss Carson, my congratulations." "Thank you," she murmured, feeling heat rise to her cheeks under his steady gaze. "Rachel's father and Mr. Winters reached an agreement just yesterday, Mrs. Abernathy continued, oblivious to Rachel's discomfort. "Such a blessing, what with the Carson place struggling so badly since the drought." Quentin's expression shifted subtly. "Is that so?" His voice remained neutral, but Rachel thought she detected a note of something else beneath the politeness. The conversation was mercifully interrupted when another customer entered. Rachel quickly made her purchases and bid them goodbye. As she stepped back onto the boardwalk, she nearly collided with a solid chest. "Pardon me, Miss Carson." Quentin Lawson steadied her with a gentle hand on her arm. He had followed her outside and now stood looking down at her with those penetrating eyes. "I didn't mean to startle you." "It's quite all right, Mr. Lawson." Rachel stepped back, suddenly aware of how improper it would seem to be conversing alone with a stranger. "I wanted to ask," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Is this marriage what you want?" Rachel stiffened, shocked by his directness. "Mr. Lawson, that's hardly, forgive my bluntness," he interrupted softly, "but there was something in your eyes back there. Something that didn't look like a bride-to-be's happiness." For a moment, Rachel considered the proper response indignation, perhaps, or a cool dismissal. Instead, truth spilled from her lips before she could stop it. "What I want doesn't matter. My family needs this." Quentin's expression darkened. "I know Jeremiah Winters, known him for years. He's not," he stopped himself. "You deserve kindness, Miss Carson, not just security." The words struck her like physical blows. Kindness, such a simple thing to want, yet it felt like an impossible luxury. "Mr. Lawson," she said, keeping her voice steady with effort, "thank you for your concern, but I must go." She turned away quickly, but his voice followed her. "I'll be in town another week, if you ever need to talk." Rachel mounted her mare and rode away without looking back, his words echoing in her mind. The Carson homestead sat nestled in a small valley 3 miles from town, once fertile land, now struggling under the unrelenting drought. Rachel found her younger siblings, Sophie, Daniel, and little Emma, gathered around the well as she rode in. "Rachel," Emma, just 6 years old, came running. "Did you bring anything from town?" Rachel smiled despite her troubled thoughts. "Just some mending things. Where's Pa?" Daniel, 12 and already taking on a man's responsibilities, pointed toward the barn. "With Mr. Winters. They're talking about moving our cattle to his north pasture until the rains come." Rachel's stomach tightened. She hadn't expected Jeremiah to be here today. Taking a deep breath, she headed toward the barn. She heard the men's voices before she saw them, her father's deferential tone contrasting with Jeremiah Winters' deep, commanding rumble. Rachel paused at the entrance, watching the scene through the half-open door. Jeremiah stood tall for his age, with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He dressed well, too well for ranch work, in a black suit and polished boots. Many women might find him handsome still, in a severe way. But something in his eyes always made Rachel uneasy, a coldness that no smile could warm. "You'll move into the main house, of course," Jeremiah was saying. "The children can stay in the servants' quarters until we decide their future." Her father nodded. "That's very generous of you, Jeremiah." "Not at all. Rachel will need help managing the household, though I expect her primary attention will be devoted to more wifely duties." Rachel felt bile rise in her throat. Stepping back, she nearly tripped over a feed bucket, sending it clattering across the packed earth. Both men turned. "Rachel," her father said, a forced brightness in his voice. "Mr. Winters has come to discuss wedding arrangements." Jeremiah Winters smiled, his teeth too white against his tanned face. "My bride-to-be, come here, girl, let me look at you." Rachel approached slowly, keeping her eyes lowered as she'd been taught was respectful. Jeremiah lifted her chin with one finger, examining her face like he might inspect a horse before purchase. "Pretty as a picture," he declared. "You'll be a fitting mistress for Winters Ranch." "Thank you, sir," Rachel managed, hating how small her voice sounded. "Walk with me," Jeremiah commanded, offering his arm. Rachel had no choice but to take it, allowing him to lead her out of the barn and toward the small orchard beyond. "Your father tells me you're quite accomplished," he said as they walked. "Reading, figures, household management, good qualities in a wife." "I try to be useful, sir. And obedient, I trust." It wasn't a question. Rachel said nothing, and Jeremiah continued. "My first wife, God rest her soul, understood her place. I expect the same from you." His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, his grip tightening slightly. "I'm not an unreasonable man, Rachel. Be a good wife, and you'll want for nothing." They had reached the far side of the orchard now, out of sight of the house. Jeremiah stopped and turned her to face him. "I think a proper betrothal deserves a kiss, don't you?" Before Rachel could respond, he pulled her roughly against him. His mouth descended on hers, hard and insistent, his beard scratching her skin. Rachel stood rigid, enduring his attentions until he finally released her. "You'll learn to be more responsive," he said with a hint of irritation. "I'll teach you what pleases a man." That night, Rachel lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the room she shared with her sisters. The weight of her future pressed down on her like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, its lonely sound matching the emptiness she felt inside. 2 days later, Rachel was gathering eggs in the henhouse when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Stepping outside, she was startled to see Quentin Lawson riding toward the house, leading a second horse laden with supplies. Her father emerged from the barn, frowning at the unexpected visitor. "Can I help you, mister?" Quentin dismounted smoothly, removing his hat. "Mr. Carson, name's Quentin Lawson. I'm looking to hire some help for a few days. Heard in town your boy Daniel has a way with horses." Rachel approached cautiously as her father considered the stranger. "What kind of work?" "Got a string of broncs that need gentling before I deliver them to a buyer in Denver. My usual wrangler broke his arm. I'll pay fair $3 a day plus meals." It was generous pay, especially for a boy Daniel's age. Rachel could see her father weighing the offer against his suspicion of this unknown cowboy. "Daniel's got chores here," Thomas Carson said slowly. "I can manage them, Pa," Rachel interjected, earning a sharp look from her father. Quentin's eyes briefly met hers before returning to her father. "It would be a big help, sir. Only need him for 3, maybe 4 days." The promise of $15 was too much for Thomas Carson to refuse. "All right then. Daniel," he called toward the house. The boy came running, his eyes widening at the sight of Quentin's fine buckskin horse. When told of the job offer, he could barely contain his excitement. "Be ready to ride at first light tomorrow," Quentin instructed. Then, turning to Rachel, he added, "Miss Carson, I've brought some supplies from town. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you were looking for fabric for your wedding preparations." Rachel was stunned by the gesture. "That's very thoughtful, Mr. Lawson, but no obligation," he said easily. "Consider it payment in advance for borrowing your brother." As Quentin unloaded the packages from the packhorse, Rachel noticed her father watching with narrowed eyes. She quickly began sorting through the items' lengths of fine cotton, lace trim, and even a small tin of hard candies that would delight Emma. "This is too generous," she murmured when her father had moved away to show Daniel which chores needed covering in his absence. "Maybe," Quentin replied quietly, "but I meant what I said in town." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "You deserve kindness, Rachel." The way he said her name, not Miss Carson, but Rachel, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the spring breeze. Before she could respond, he had mounted his horse and tipped his hat. "First light, Daniel," he called, and then he was gone, dust swirling in his wake. That evening, as Rachel helped Emma sort the candies into equal piles for each child, her father approached. "That cowboy," he said, his voice low so the children wouldn't hear. "I don't trust his motives." Rachel kept her eyes on the candies. "He's just being neighborly, Pa." "Men like that aren't neighborly to young women without expecting something in return." His expression hardened. "Your promise to Jeremiah Winters now, don't forget that." "How could I?" Rachel replied, unable to keep a bitter edge from her voice. "When you remind me every day that I've been sold to pay your debts." Her father's hand shot out, gripping her wrist painfully. "You watch your tongue, girl. Jeremiah is offering us salvation. Without this marriage, we lose everything." Rachel pulled her arm free. "I know my duty, Pa." "You've made it very clear." The following morning, Daniel left with Quentin before dawn. Rachel threw herself into chores, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. Just 12 days until the wedding now. Each sunset brought her closer to a lifetime bound to a man who saw her as property. 3 days passed with no word from Daniel or Quentin. Rachel was hanging laundry when she saw a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. Her heart jumped, thinking it might be them returning, but as the riders came into view, she recognized Jeremiah Winters at the head of a group of men. Her father hurried from the field to greet them, wiping sweat from his brow. "Jeremiah, wasn't expecting you today." Winters dismounted, his expression thunderous. "Where is your boy and that cowboy he's with?" Thomas looked confused. "Daniel's helping Mr. Lawson with some horses. They should be back tomorrow." "That help is horse theft," Jeremiah spat. "Your boy and Lawson were seen driving a herd of my yearlings toward the territorial line." Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. "That's not possible," she protested, stepping forward. "Daniel would never—" "Quiet, girl," Jeremiah snapped. "Your brother was identified by my foreman. As was Quentin Lawson, a man I should have run out of the territory years ago." "There must be some mistake," Thomas insisted, but doubt had crept into his voice. "No mistake. I've got 6 men riding the northern border now. When we catch them, your boy will hang alongside that rustler." Rachel gasped. "You can't mean that. Daniel's just 12 years old." Jeremiah turned his cold eyes on her. "Old enough to steal, old enough to hang." His gaze softened fractionally. "Unless—" "Unless what?" Thomas asked desperately. "Unless you prove where your loyalties lie, Carson." Jeremiah gestured to his men. "We're riding out to find them. You're coming with us." Thomas paled. "You want me to hunt down my own son?" "I want you to bring your son to justice. And if you do, I might be persuaded to show mercy. After all, he'll soon be my stepson." Jeremiah's gaze shifted to Rachel. "And you, my dear, will move up our wedding. I want you in my house by week's end, where I can keep an eye on you." Rachel felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "That's only 3 days away. Then you'd better start packing," Jeremiah cut her off. "Thomas, get your gun. We're leaving now." Her father hesitated only briefly before nodding in defeat. "Let me tell my daughters what's happening." As the men waited, Thomas pulled Rachel aside. "Listen to me," he whispered urgently. "Take your sisters and go to your aunt in Denver. I've done wrong by you all, and I'm sorry." Rachel stared at him in shock. "Pa, what are you saying? Winters is a cruel man. I was a fool to think he'd treat you well." He pressed a small pouch into her hand. "It's not much, but it might get you to Denver. Wait until nightfall, then go." Before Rachel could respond, her father returned to the waiting men. Within minutes, they had ridden away, leaving her standing alone with the weight of decision pressing down upon her. As darkness fell, Rachel packed what little they could carry, some clothing, food, and the small pouch of coins her father had given her. She explained to Sophie and Emma that they were going on a journey to visit their aunt, careful not to frighten them with the truth of their situation. They were nearly ready to leave when the sound of approaching horses made Rachel's heart freeze. Peering through the window, she saw 2 riders dismounting in the yard, Quentin and Daniel. Rachel ran outside, relief and fear mingling in her chest. "Daniel, thank God you're safe." Her brother looked confused by her intensity. "Course I'm safe. We're just back a day early because we finished the work." Quentin's expression changed as he took in Rachel's face. "What's happened?" "Jeremiah Winters was here," she explained quickly. "He's accused you both of stealing his cattle. Pa's gone with him to search for you." Daniel's eyes widened in horror. "But we never—" "I know," Quentin cut in grimly. "Jeremiah's been looking for a reason to come after me for years." He turned to Rachel. "Where were they headed?" "The northern border." "Jeremiah said you were driving the cattle toward the territorial line." Quentin cursed under his breath. "That's the opposite direction from where we've been." He glanced at the packed bags visible through the open door. "You're leaving?" Rachel nodded. "Pa told me to take the girls to Denver." "But now that you're here, your father was right," Quentin said firmly. "Jeremiah won't stop until he gets what he wants, and right now he wants me dead and you under his control. But we can explain. Men like Jeremiah Winters don't listen to explanations, Rachel." Quentin's voice softened. "Get your sisters. We need to move quickly." Within 30 minutes, they were riding away from the Carson homestead, Rachel and Emma on one horse, Sophie and Daniel on another, with Quentin leading the way on his buckskin. They rode east at first, away from both Denver and the northern border where Jeremiah's men were searching. "Where are we going?" Rachel asked when they paused to rest the horses after several hours of riding. "I know a place," Quentin replied, helping Emma down from the saddle. An old line shack about 20 miles from here. We can rest there while we figure out our next move. As dawn broke, they reached the line shack, a simple one-room structure nestled in a small copse of trees near a creek. It was dusty but sound, with a stone fireplace and rough bunks built into the walls. "It's not much," Quentin apologized as they dismounted, "but it's safe. Winters doesn't know about this place." Rachel helped her siblings settle inside while Quentin tended to the horses. When he returned, she met him outside, away from the children's ears. "You didn't steal any cattle," she said. "It wasn't a question." Quentin shook his head. "We've been south of town, working with horses the whole time. Daniel can tell you." "Then why would Jeremiah say those things?" Quentin's jaw tightened. "Because he wants me gone, and he wants you isolated." He hesitated before continuing. "Winters and I have history, bad history. His first wife, Elizabeth, was my cousin." Rachel stared at him in surprise. "Your cousin?" "She was like a sister to me. We grew up together." Quentin's eyes darkened with old pain. When she married Jeremiah, she was barely 20. He was 45 and already had a reputation for his temper. A chill ran through Rachel as she realized where this was going. What happened to her? Officially, she fell down the stairs, broke her neck. His voice was flat. "But I saw the bruises before they buried her. I knew what he'd done. And no one believed you." "Jeremiah Winters owns half the county and most of the law. He made sure everyone thought I was just a grieving relative making wild accusations." Quentin met her eyes directly. "That's why I came back to Sloan when I heard about you, Rachel. I couldn't stop what happened to Elizabeth, but I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." Rachel felt tears burning behind her eyes. "So you offered Daniel that job, to get close enough to warn you?" "Yes." He looked away, ashamed. "I didn't plan to interfere beyond that, but then I met you and he stopped himself." "And what?" Rachel pressed, stepping closer. Quentin's eyes, when they met hers again, held a warmth that made her breath catch. "And I saw someone who deserves so much more than being traded to a monster because of her father's debts." They stared at each other for a long moment before Rachel finally broke the silence. "What do we do now? Get you and your siblings to Denver like your father wanted. Your aunt can protect you there, at least until we can clear Daniel's name. And you, Jeremiah won't stop hunting you." A small, sad smile touched Quentin's lips. "I've been avoiding Jeremiah Winters for 5 years. I'll manage." The days that followed took on a strange, dreamlike quality for Rachel. They remained at the line shack, Quentin hunting for food while Rachel kept the children occupied with chores and simple games. Each evening, Quentin rode out to scout the area, making sure Jeremiah's men hadn't picked up their trail. On the third night, Rachel sat by the fire after the children had fallen asleep, mending one of Daniel's shirts by the flickering light. The door opened quietly and Quentin slipped in, bringing the cool night air with him. "All clear?" she asked softly. He nodded, hanging his hat on a peg. No sign of riders anywhere nearby. Settling onto the bench across from her, he watched her nimble fingers work the needle. "You're good at that," Rachel smiled faintly. "Necessary skill when you've got 3 growing siblings." "Tell me about them," Quentin said. "What are their hopes, their dreams?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked about her siblings' aspirations before, not even her father, who saw them primarily as extra hands for the failing ranch. "Sophie wants to be a teacher someday. She's already reading better than most adults in Sloan. Daniel loves animals. He can gentle the wildest horse just by talking to it. And Emma." Rachel's smile widened. "Emma says she's going to be the first woman sheriff in Colorado Territory." Quentin chuckled. "I'd vote for her." "What about you?" Rachel asked, setting aside her mending. "What does Quentin Lawson dream of?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Then, his voice low, "Land of my own, a place where the grass grows tall enough to hide a standing man, cattle with my brand on them," he paused, "and someone to share it with." The simplicity of his dream touched her. It wasn't so different from what she wanted: a home, security, the freedom to choose her own path. "And you?" he asked. "What does Rachel Carson dream of when she's free to dream?" Rachel looked into the fire, considering. "Choice," she finally said. "The right to decide my own future, to marry for love, not necessity." She glanced up to find his eyes on her, intense and unwavering. And children someday, but born of love, not duty. Simple dreams, Quentin said softly, and worthy ones. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of how aligned their hopes were. Rachel felt herself leaning slightly toward him across the small table, drawn by a force she couldn't name. The moment was shattered by a small voice from the bunks. "Rachel, I'm thirsty." Emma had woken, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Rachel quickly rose to fetch water, aware of Quentin's gaze following her movements. By the time Emma had been settled back to sleep, the intimate atmosphere had dissipated, but something had changed between them, something neither could ignore. The next morning, Quentin announced his plan to ride into the nearest town for supplies and information. "We need to know what's happening, if your father's returned, if there's word about us." Rachel worried at her lip. "It's dangerous. It's necessary," he countered gently. "We can't hide here forever." She knew he was right, but fear gripped her at the thought of him riding into potential danger. "Be careful," she said, handing him a small package of food for the journey. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and neither pulled away immediately. "I will," he promised, his voice low. Then he was gone, leaving Rachel with an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with worry. The hours stretched endlessly as she waited for his return. The children played by the creek, supervised by Sophie, while Rachel paced the small cabin. When hoofbeats finally approached at dusk, she rushed outside, relief flooding through her at the sight of Quentin's familiar silhouette. But her relief turned to dread when she saw his expression as he dismounted. "What is it? What's happened?" she asked, searching his face. Quentin glanced toward the children, then led her a short distance away. "Your father's back at your homestead. Jeremiah's still out searching with some of his men, but..." He hesitated. "But what?" "Jeremiah's posted a reward for information on our whereabouts, $500. Rachel gasped. It was an enormous sum, enough to tempt almost anyone in the territory. "There's more," Quentin continued grimly. "He's claimed Daniel and I murdered one of his ranch hands during the cattle theft. It's a hanging offense, Rachel." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "That's a lie." "Of course it is. But it means we can't risk taking Daniel to town to clear his name. Not yet." Quentin ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "We need proof that we were nowhere near Winter's cattle that day." "The horses," Rachel said suddenly. "You were breaking horses for someone, right? Who was the buyer?" "James Harrington, over in Silverdale. He's expecting delivery next week." "Then he could vouch for you, for both of you." Quentin's eyes lit with new hope. He could. "But Silverdale's 3 days' ride from here, and we can't all go." The unspoken question hung between them. Who would stay and who would go? Rachel made the decision quickly. "You and Daniel should go. Get written testimony from Mr. Harrington, maybe even bring him back with you if he's willing. Sophie, Emma, and I will be safe here." Quentin shook his head firmly. "I'm not leaving you three alone. It's too risky." "We need that proof, Quentin. It's the only way to clear Daniel's name." She laid a hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "We'll be fine for a few days. No one knows about this place, you said so yourself." They argued well into the evening, but in the end, logic won out. Daniel needed to be present for Harrington to confirm his alibi, and Quentin was the only one who could safely guide him to Silverdale and back. With great reluctance, Quentin agreed to leave at first light. That night, after the children were asleep, Rachel and Quentin sat outside beneath a blanket of stars, planning every detail of the journey. "If we're not back in 6 days, take the girls and head for Denver," Quentin instructed. "Your aunt's name is Margaret Fenton on Arapahoe Street." Rachel nodded. "Yes, she married a banker. Good, she'll have resources to help you." He handed her a small pistol. "Keep this with you. Do you know how to use it?" "My pa taught me, but I've never shot at anything but bottles." "Hopefully you won't need to." His eyes were serious in the moonlight. "Promise me you'll use it if you have to, Rachel. Promise me you'll protect yourself and your sisters." "I promise," she whispered. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Rachel was acutely aware of him, beside her, the warmth of his body in the cool night air, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Rachel," he finally said, his voice rough, "when this is over, She turned to him, heart hammering in her chest. Yes. Instead of words, Quentin's response came in the form of a gentle hand cupping her cheek. His eyes asked a question, and her slight nod answered it. When his lips met hers, it was nothing like Jeremiah's forceful claim. Quentin kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears, a kiss that spoke of respect and possibility. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "That's not why I helped you," he whispered. "I need you to know that." "I know," she assured him, her hands still gripping the front of his shirt. "I've known since the moment you asked if the marriage was what I wanted. No one had ever asked me that before." Morning came too quickly. Rachel stood with her sisters, watching Quentin and Daniel ride away, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. 3 days to Silverdale, 3 days back. 6 days of waiting and wondering. The first 2 days passed uneventfully. Rachel kept the girls busy with chores and improvised lessons, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. On the 3rd day, a spring storm rolled in, bringing driving rain that drummed against the cabin's roof and turned the nearby creek into a rushing torrent. "Will Quentin and Daniel be all right in this weather?" Sophie asked as they huddled near the fireplace that evening. "They'll be fine," Rachel assured her, though she worried about the same thing. "Quentin knows what he's doing." Emma, cuddled against Rachel's side, looked up with solemn eyes. "Are we going to marry Quentin when we grow up?" The innocent question startled a laugh from Rachel. "What makes you ask that, little one?" "Because you look at him the way Mama used to look at Pa, all soft and glowy." Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks as Sophie giggled. "I do not look glowy," she protested. "You do," Sophie insisted. "And he looks at you the same way." Later, after her sisters were asleep, Rachel sat by the fire, pondering Sophie's observation. Did she look at Quentin differently? Did her feelings show so plainly on her face? And more importantly, did he truly look at her the same way? The storm continued through the night and into the next day. By afternoon, the creek had spilled its banks, cutting off access to the small garden where they'd been gathering wild onions and greens to supplement their dwindling supplies. Rachel was checking their food stores when a sound made her freeze, hoofbeats approaching slowly through the rain. Her heart leapt. Had Quentin returned early, but caution quickly tempered her hope. It was too soon. Grabbing the pistol from its hiding place, she whispered urgently to Sophie, "Take Emma and hide under the bunks. Don't come out until I call for you." The girls obeyed instantly, sensing the fear in their sister's voice. Rachel positioned herself by the window, pistol ready, and peered through the rain-streaked glass. 3 riders emerged from the trees, moving carefully through the downpour. As they drew closer, Rachel's blood ran cold. The lead rider was Jeremiah Winters. How had they found the cabin? Had someone from town followed Quentin the day he went for supplies? Or had they simply been searching every possible hiding place in the area? Rachel's mind raced. Perhaps they hadn't seen her at the window. Perhaps they were just seeking shelter from the storm and didn't know who was inside. That slim hope died when she heard Jeremiah's voice, carrying clearly despite the rain. "Rachel, Carson, we know you're in there. Come out now and no one needs to get hurt." She remained silent, weighing her options. The pistol had 6 bullets. There were 3 men. Even if her aim was perfect, an unlikely prospect they would return fire, and her sisters would be caught in the crossfire. "Rachel," Jeremiah called again, "your father's worried sick about you. He just wants you home safe." She didn't believe that for a second. If her father was truly concerned, he would have come himself. This was Jeremiah's hunt, not her father's rescue. "I'm going to count to 10, Jeremiah announced. "Then we're coming in." Rachel made her decision. Tucking the pistol into the waistband of her skirt, covered by her shawl, she called out, "Wait, I'm coming out." "Rachel, no," Sophie whispered frantically from beneath the bunk. "Stay hidden," Rachel ordered quietly. "No matter what happens, don't come out until they're gone." Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped onto the small porch. Rain immediately soaked her dress and hair, but she stood tall, refusing to cower before Jeremiah Winters. "There you are, my dear," Jeremiah said, a cold smile stretching his lips. "You've led us on quite a chase." "What do you want, Mr. Winters?" Rachel kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. Is that any way to greet your fiancé? He dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men. I've come to take you home, of course. This isn't about me, Rachel countered. You're hunting Quentin Lawson. You always have been. Something dangerous flashed in Jeremiah's eyes. So he's told you his version of events, has he? Filled your head with lies about me, he told me about Elizabeth. Jeremiah's expression hardened. My wife's death was a tragic accident. Lawson never accepted that. Because it wasn't an accident. The words tumbled out before Rachel could stop them. You killed her. In 2 quick strides, Jeremiah was on the porch, his hand closing around Rachel's arm with bruising force. You do well to watch your tongue, girl. You're still going to be my wife. I'd rather die, Rachel hissed, trying to pull away. Jeremiah's grip tightened painfully. That can be arranged after you tell me where Lawson and your brother are. I don't know. Liar. He jerked her closer. They left 3 days ago. Where did they go? Rachel remained silent, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Jeremiah's patience snapped. With a growl of frustration, he dragged her down the porch steps toward his men and the waiting horses. Search the cabin, he ordered one of them. Find the other children. No. Rachel struggled in earnest now, terror for her sisters overriding her fear for herself. Leave them alone. They've done nothing. They're harboring fugitives, Jeremiah said coldly. That makes them complicit. As his man headed for the cabin, Rachel made a desperate decision. The pistol was still hidden beneath her shawl. Wrenching her arm free with strength born of desperation, she drew the weapon and pointed it directly at Jeremiah's chest. Stop, right there. Each word was punctuated by the hammering of her heart. Jeremiah froze, genuine surprise crossing his features before his expression settled into amused contempt. Put that down before you hurt yourself, Rachel. Call your man back. Now. Jeremiah glanced at his companion, who had stopped halfway to the cabin, uncertain. She won't shoot, Jeremiah said confidently. She doesn't have it in her. Rachel cocked the hammer. You're willing to bet your life on that? For a moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the steady drumming of rain and Rachel's ragged breathing. Then Jeremiah smiled a slow, cruel smile that chilled her to the bone. You might get one shot off, he conceded. But what then? My men will cut you down before you can cock that pistol a second time, and then they'll find your precious sisters anyway. As if to emphasize his point, his second man drew his own weapon, aiming it casually in Rachel's direction. She felt her resolve wavering. Jeremiah was right, she couldn't shoot them all. Drop the gun, Rachel, Jeremiah said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Come with me peacefully and I'll leave your sisters alone. You have my word. Your word means nothing, Rachel replied, but her hand had begun to tremble. It's your only option, Jeremiah pressed. The only way to save them. Long seconds passed as Rachel wrestled with the impossible choice before her. Then, slowly, she lowered the pistol. Jeremiah smiled in triumph. A wise decision, he gestured to one of his men. Tie her hands, we're leaving. The children stay here, Rachel insisted, clinging to one last bargaining chip. That was our deal. No, Jeremiah corrected, I said I'd leave them alone, and I will write here with no provisions and no protection. The rain's rising, this valley will flood by morning. Horror dawned on Rachel's face as she realized his cruel intention. You can't, I can do whatever I please, Jeremiah cut her off. That's a lesson you'll learn very soon, my dear. As rough hands bound her wrists, Rachel fought back tears of rage and despair. She had failed to protect her sisters, failed to hold out until Quentin's return, failed in every way that mattered. Jeremiah mounted his horse and nodded to his men to bring Rachel to the spare mount they'd brought for her. As they dragged her toward the waiting animal, a shout rang out from the trees beyond the cabin. Winters? All heads turned toward the voice. Through the curtain of rain, a lone rider emerged, rifle raised and aimed squarely at Jeremiah. Lawson, Jeremiah breathed, his hand moving toward his own weapon. Don't, Quentin warned, his voice carrying clearly despite the downpour. My first shot's for you and I won't miss. Rachel's heart soared at the sight of him, even as fear for his safety gripped her. Where was Daniel? Had Quentin sent him somewhere safe? You're outnumbered, Lawson, Jeremiah called back, though he kept his hands visible. 3 guns against 1. 2, came another voice as Daniel emerged from behind the cabin, holding Rachel's dropped pistol with determination if not expertise. Jeremiah's eyes narrowed as he assessed the new threat. The boy's no gunman. He doesn't need to be, Quentin replied evenly. He just needs to pull a trigger. A tense standoff ensued, broken only by the steady patter of rain. Rachel could see the calculations running behind Jeremiah's eyes, weighing his chances, considering his options. His men looked to him nervously, waiting for direction. "Cut her loose," Quentin demanded. "Let her go, and maybe you ride out of here alive." For a moment, Rachel thought Jeremiah would comply. Then, with shocking swiftness, he grabbed her from his man's grasp and pulled her in front of him like a shield. "Drop your rifle, Lawson," he ordered, drawing his own pistol and pressing it to Rachel's temple. "Or I'll put a bullet in your sweetheart's head right now." Rachel felt the cold metal against her skin but kept her eyes fixed on Quentin. She could see the anguish in his expression, the desperate calculation. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his rifle. "That's better," Jeremiah said with satisfaction. "Now toss it away," Quentin complied, the weapon landing in the mud several feet away. "Daniel," Quentin said calmly, "go get your sisters from the cabin." "The boy stays where he is," Jeremiah snapped. "The creek's rising," Quentin argued. "Those girls need to get to higher ground. That's not my concern." "It should be," Quentin replied, his voice hardening, "because if anything happens to those children, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in. I will hunt you to the ends of the earth, Jeremiah." "Just like I did after Elizabeth." Something in Quentin's tone seemed to unsettle Jeremiah. His grip on Rachel loosened fractionally. "You have what you want," Quentin continued. "You have me, let them go." Rachel could feel Jeremiah weighing his options, the tension in his body communicating his indecision. Finally, he barked an order to Daniel. "Get them, quickly." Daniel hurried into the cabin, emerging moments later with Sophie and Emma, their eyes wide with fear. Jeremiah jerked his head toward Quentin. "Go to him." The girls hesitated until Rachel nodded encouragingly. "It's all right, go with Quentin and Daniel." As Sophie and Emma ran to Quentin's side, Jeremiah shifted his grip on Rachel, keeping the gun at her head but positioning her more securely in front of him. "Mount up," he ordered his men. "We're leaving, Lawson, you follow us at a distance. Any tricks and she dies." "No," Quentin said firmly. "Let her go, take me instead." "That's not how this works," Jeremiah snarled. "I'm taking what's mine." "She's not yours," Quentin countered. "She never was. She's not property to be traded for debts. Tell that to her father. He was happy enough with our arrangement." "Because you threatened him, just like you're threatening her now." Quentin took a step forward, hands raised to show he was unarmed. "It's me you want, Jeremiah. It's always been me." "You're right about that," Jeremiah admitted, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "I've waited 5 years to see you hang for slandering me after Elizabeth's death." "It wasn't slander, you killed her." Quentin's eyes hardened. "I know it, you know it, and now Rachel knows it too." "Lies," Jeremiah shouted, his composure cracking. The gun at Rachel's temple wavered slightly. "Elizabeth was clumsy. She fell after you pushed her." Quentin took another careful step forward. "Just like you pushed your first wife, Miriam. Convenient how both your wives had fatal accidents, isn't it?" Rachel felt Jeremiah stiffen against her back. "How did you?" "I found Miriam's brother in Kansas City last year," Quentin said, still inching closer. He had interesting stories to tell about his sister's marriage, about the bruises she tried to hide when she visited, about how you threatened him when he asked questions after her death. Jeremiah's breathing had quickened, his grip on Rachel becoming painfully tight. "You have no proof." "I have sworn testimony. From Miriam's brother, from your former housekeeper who saw you strike Elizabeth, from your ranch hand who helped cover up the truth." Quentin was only a few yards away now. "That's where we've been, Jeremiah, gathering the witnesses who will see you hang." With a roar of rage, Jeremiah shoved Rachel aside and raised his pistol toward Quentin. The shot cracked across the valley, echoing off the distant hills. But it wasn't Jeremiah's gun that had fired. Rachel, thrown off balance by Jeremiah's push, watched in stunned silence as he staggered backward, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. Behind him stood Daniel, Rachel's pistol still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. Jeremiah's men, seeing their employer fall, quickly raised their hands in surrender. One of them, a younger man with fear in his eyes, blurted out, "We didn't know about any murders. We were just following orders." Rachel rushed to Quentin's side, trembling with shock and relief. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly as the rain continued to fall around them. "Are you all right?" he murmured against her hair. "Yes," she whispered. "But Daniel." They both turned to the boy who stood frozen, the pistol now hanging limply at his side. Quentin gently approached him, taking the weapon and placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You did what you had to do," Quentin said softly, "to protect your family." Daniel nodded numbly, his young face pale with the weight of what he'd done. Rachel went to him, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "It's over now," she promised. "It's all over." The rains finally stopped 3 days later. Quentin rode into Sloan with Jeremiah's men, who had agreed to testify about the false accusations against Daniel in exchange for leniency. The town was in uproar at the news of Jeremiah Winter's death and the revelations about his past. Sheriff Taylor, a man who had long been in Winter's pocket, found himself facing uncomfortable questions about his failure to investigate Elizabeth's death years earlier. Thomas Carson, upon learning the full truth, wept with shame for what he had nearly done to his daughter. 2 weeks later, as summer began to settle over the territory, Rachel stood in the small churchyard beside her father and siblings. The burden of debt that had hung over them had been lifted, ironically, by Jeremiah himself. In death, his crimes exposed, the courts had awarded compensation to the families of his victims, including Elizabeth Lawson's next of kin. "You're sure about this?" Thomas asked his daughter quietly, watching as Quentin spoke with the minister by the church steps. Rachel nodded, a quiet certainty in her heart. "More sure than I've ever been about anything." Her father sighed, regret evident in his weathered face. "I failed you, Rachel. Tried to sell your future to save myself. I don't deserve your forgiveness." "You were desperate," Rachel replied, taking his hand. "And in the end, you tried to save us. That counts for something?" Thomas glanced toward Quentin. "He's a good man, better than I was to your mother." "Yes," Rachel agreed simply. "He is." The small ceremony that followed was everything Rachel had once dreamed of, but never thought possible. A marriage entered freely, with love and hope rather than obligation and fear. Quentin's eyes never left hers as they spoke their vows, his hands steady and warm as he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. "I promise you kindness," he whispered, words meant for her alone. "Every day for all our days." Tears blurred Rachel's vision as she completed her own vows. She had entered the church as Rachel Carson, a young woman whose future had been bartered away without her consent. She left as Rachel Lawson, her hand clasped firmly in her husband's, her path finally her own to choose. That evening, in the small house Quentin had purchased at the edge of town, Rachel stood by the window watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. Strong arms encircled her from behind, and she leaned back against Quentin's chest with a contented sigh. "Happy," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Very," she replied, turning in his embrace to face him. "Though I'm still not sure what I did to deserve this." Quentin smiled, tracing the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "You existed, Rachel Lawson, that's enough." Later, as moonlight spilled across their bed, Rachel discovered the final piece of freedom that had been denied her: the joy of giving herself freely to the man she loved, of passion tempered with tenderness, of desire matched with respect. In Quentin's arms, she found not just pleasure but partnership, not just heat but home. 3 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The small house at the edge of town had been replaced by a sprawling ranch house on land that Quentin had purchased with his share of the winter's settlement. True to his dream, the grass grew tall enough in spring to hide a standing man, and cattle bearing the double L brand grazed contentedly on the rolling hills. Rachel's siblings thrived in their new home. Sophie had begun teaching at the local school, her quiet intelligence finding perfect expression in the classroom. Daniel, now 15, had grown into a skilled horseman with an eye for good stock. And Emma, at 9, still proclaimed her intention to become sheriff, though she had temporarily set aside that ambition to focus on becoming the best aunt in all of Colorado Territory. The reason for this new goal dozed peacefully in Rachel's arms as she rocked slowly on the front porch. Thomas Quentin Lawson, just 3 months old, had his father's dark hair and his mother's determined chin. He was a good-natured baby, rarely fussing except when hungry or tired. The sound of hoofbeats announced Quentin's return from town. Rachel smiled as he dismounted and bounded up the porch steps, pausing to press a kiss to her lips before gently touching their son's downy head. "How are my favorite people today?" he asked, settling into the chair beside hers. "Wondering what took you so long in town," Rachel teased. "Did Mrs. Abernathy talk your ear off again?" Quentin grinned. "Worse. Your father challenged me to chess, said he'd finally figured out how to beat me, and did he? Not even close." Quentin's expression softened as he gazed at their sleeping son. "Though he did mention he's thinking of courting the widow Jenkins." Rachel raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Margaret Jenkins? Really?" She makes him laugh, apparently. Quentin reached over to take her free hand. "He said he finally understands what I meant that day about deserving kindness. Says he sees it now when he watches us together." Rachel squeezed his fingers, thinking of how far they had all come. Her father, once willing to sacrifice her future, had slowly rebuilt their relationship, earning her forgiveness through consistent effort and genuine remorse. He had become a doting grandfather to little Thomas and a steadfast friend to Quentin. "Speaking of kindness," Quentin said, reaching into his pocket, "I brought you something." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Shifting the baby to one arm, Rachel opened it carefully to reveal a beautiful silver hair comb inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "Quentin, it's lovely," she exclaimed, running her fingers over the delicate design. "Saw it and thought of you." He smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "And before you lecture me about practical gifts, I also brought flour, coffee, and those peppermint sticks Emma likes." Rachel laughed softly, mindful of their sleeping son. "You know me too well." "I'm still learning," he countered, leaning in to kiss her again, and enjoying every minute of it. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Rachel reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a young woman with no choices to a wife, mother, and partner who shaped her own destiny. From fear to freedom. From obligation to love. Thomas stirred in her arms, his tiny fist stretching upward as he yawned. Quentin reached out and Rachel transferred their son to his father's strong, gentle hands. "Hello there, little man," Quentin murmured, his voice soft with wonder even after 3 months of fatherhood. "Have you been good for your mama today?" Rachel watched them together, her heart so full it ached. This was what she had been promised, in a way: security, family, a future. But unlike the cold arrangement with Jeremiah Winters, this promise had been freely given and joyfully accepted. "I was thinking," Quentin said, looking up from their son's face to meet her eyes, "about expanding the west pasture next year. Maybe building that bigger barn we talked about." "Planning for the future, Mr. Lawson," Rachel smiled. "Our future," he corrected, reaching for her hand again. "Yours, mine, and this little fellow's, and whoever else might come along." As darkness settled over the land they had built together, Rachel Lawson counted her blessings: a husband who treated her as an equal, a son who represented their shared love, siblings who were finding their own paths, and a home filled with the kindness she had once believed beyond her reach. The young woman who had been promised to a widower twice her age had found something far more precious than security. She had found a life of her own choosing, with a man who had seen her value when she couldn't see it herself. And as stars began to appear in the vast Colorado sky, Rachel knew with absolute certainty that this love, this family, this freedom was what she had deserved all along.